Whoosh! Are you curious how I made this? Well, stay tuned. I'm going to tell you all about it. So this was for PETA, their brand new Just So You Know podcast. And it was actually the first bit of design work that I've done for a vegan client, which is very cool. Hopefully not the last. Overall, it was very fun and I enjoyed it a lot. We did hit a bit of a speed bump partway through, and I'll get into all of that. But right back at the beginning. So this project, although the final thing was going to be for PETA's new podcast, wasn't actually working for PETA. It was Jamie and Justina who are the hosts. And they came to me because they were launching this brand new podcast. And it was kind of them that wanted a cool new intro. And the plan was to make something cool, show it to PETA, and then hopefully they would like it and they would use it. So we had our initial call and they explained what they had in their head. And a key visual that actually they referenced was a bit of work that I did for my good friend Maggie's EP. The first song, Shadow, had this artwork that had this long red hallway. And they really liked that and they thought that would be a good point of reference. So top tip, make sure you post all your work and keep your portfolio updated, because you never know when a bit of work that you've previously done is going to be used as a reference for future projects. And the massive bonus of using your own work as a reference is that you know exactly how you made it and you know that you could make something like that again. They already had a song chosen, which was amazing. I do like using music to give me inspiration, and I think that's why I like to do a lot of music videos at summer camp that I work at, because I always enjoy trying to match the visuals to what you can hear. And their general idea was to have some sort of barn building, and each of them has these animated characters, and they would burst out of the doors towards the camera. One of them would be maybe carrying a chicken, because Jamie's rescued chickens in the past. And then as they run out, the doors behind them slam shut, and it kind of gives the vibe that, it kind of gives hints at what the podcast is about, that it's about the animal agricultural industries and some of the things that are hidden behind closed doors. So this very rough animatic I made, I'm not an illustrator, and I just drew this with my mouse. Created an animatic with some sound effects. And an animatic is basically like a storyboard that you time out to the proper timing. So it's going to look really rough, but it's going to give you a rough idea of the length and the pacing and the feel. And you just have to imagine that all of these things look a lot better and are moving a lot better. I also created a kind of a mood board, or like a treatment, I think they also call it, which is reference images I found online that give an idea of what the final product might look like. And so I had the idea of combining some 3D environments with some 2D illustrations, trying to keep it within my skill set that I knew was going to be possible, because it was quite a quick turnaround on this project. And I think these two things work quite well together. So you've got the very rough animatic to give a sense of the tone and the pacing and how it's going to feel. And then you've got the mood board or the treatment, which is just static visuals to show how it's going to look when it's finished. Because sometimes the worry when you're sending rough, very, very early rough work to the client, this is something I've learned working at agencies before, is that depending on the client, especially if they're not particularly creative themselves, they can get very scared if they see something rough and they think, oh God, have we just accidentally hired an amateur? Are they just going to do some hand-drawn sketches and that's going to be the final thing? So showing them an idea of what the final thing might look like in the form of a treatment or a mood board can help to alleviate those fears. So the feedback on this first stage was that I've gone a bit too big. I'd kind of been thinking, wouldn't it be cool to just expand out the idea they had into a bigger storyline and a longer intro. but their feedback was just to keep it real simple, keep it to just one scene. And on a call, we kind of just hashed it out. I asked a lot of questions. Before any call, I always have some notes and some questions that I want to ask, because it's in these kind of feedback sessions that, especially in the early stages, as the designer, I kind of feel like I'm like teasing out the ideas from the client's kind of brain. And that's kind of my job. And that's kind of where maybe some of my experience comes in handy, is that I can kind of tell when there's not enough there for the idea, or when there's basically when I'm not clear on what I've got to sit down and make. That then becomes the goal of these calls, is to make sure I'm clear. And sometimes that involves asking a lot of questions and like really nailing down on the key aspects and key themes of what they want to communicate. And I really enjoy this process, because it can be really rewarding when you finally get to the end of the call and you're like, yep, we are fully in line. And, you know, it feels nice to know that I've helped us achieve that kind of alignment. And so now we're focusing more on the animals, less about telling a whole story, more just about giving glimpses into these industries, showing the scale of these industries, and showing some sort of force that is trying to cover things up. So we translated that into some of these visuals that you'll see here, which is in Blender, just making big, long hallways, hinting that there's animals in these places, having kind of experimenting with like spotlights that would like suddenly turn off, and having some doorways that would suddenly slam shut. And it was after I showed them some of these little test renders that we hit a bit of a speed bump, because I think it was a case, and this is a good learning point, that sometimes, and this happens to me as well, sometimes someone can have something in their head that looks really cool in their head, and then when they see it in front of them, they realize that they don't like it, basically. So although Jamie and Justina were super nice, and I'm not faulting them at all, and their communication was great, which is all I can ask for really in a good client, when we saw this final thing, they realized that it wasn't in line with what they wanted ultimately. And they kind of were rethinking whether they wanted to focus at all on the animal agricultural industry in the intro, because getting the tone with some of this stuff can be tricky. This is what I'm going to be probably finding out, is when you're creating content on the topic of animal rights and veganism, there's a lot of questions about whether you want to show anything too kind of graphic or gruesome or depressing or sad, and whether that will turn people off, you know, because ultimately most of these things we want it to appeal to non-vegans as well as vegans most of the time. So sometimes the fear is that if you show too much of the animals and kind of that whole thing, then it can scare people off. And that is the route that we went down with this, is that we suddenly thought that we don't want to scare people off, and we want to have an intro that's pretty neutral, I guess, and that kind of just gets across the Jamie and Justina's personality a bit, and just gets across some of the branding, and maybe that's all it needs to do. And once they are then into the podcast, people are watching, they can use a bit more kind of tact, be a bit more tactful, tactical about how they introduce these more serious messages. Whether that was the right thing to do or not, I don't know. Let me know what you think, whether you would be turned off by seeing some of these images at the start of a podcast, or whether you wouldn't. And all of this actually reminded me of a time at uni where I was designing something, and I think my tutor came over and asked what I think of it, or it could have even been before they spoke. I wanted to clarify to them that I didn't like what I was designing in front of me. And they kind of laughed, and they said something like, oh yeah, like you do sometimes have to just get the bad ideas out. You have to get the bad ideas out of your head so that you can then move on to the good ideas. And I think this was an example of that. And I can feel this quite a lot sometimes, where something can just look cool in your head, or you think it might look cool in your head, but you're not sure. And sometimes you just have to make it. And even if you're making it and it's like, this is terrible, if you just make it and finish it, then at least you can have it there and you can see, right, this is what not to do. And that can be really helpful. And it's a big part of the creative process for me. So we're partway through the project, and this little speed bump has kind of thrown everything up in the air a little bit. There was even like mentions of like, are we going to be able to create a suitable intro for this podcast or not? But I was really committed to try and make something, because I really believed in Jamie and Justina as the hosts. I really believed in this new project that they were creating. And so I thought that, can't just give up. There must be something I can make to elevate this new podcast that they're making. And so, having a bit of a rethink, PETA had done a photo shoot with Jamie and Justina, and they had already created the branding for the podcast. So this is all PETA's work. I didn't do any of the photos, didn't do any of the branding or the colors. And so I thought, this is a good start. Maybe I could just create an intro based off of this. And so we still had the song, and the song was giving me like detective-y vibes. So I thought, okay, why don't we just create take these photos, cut them out. Maybe they could be in a detective's office, and we could enter through the door and see them, and then it ends on the logo. I created this rough version in After Effects first. After Effects is a 2D program. It's just quicker, just to give a sense of what's happening, quicker to animate it. And thankfully, they really liked it. They loved it. So we were back on track. I then went into Blender because I knew I wanted to make it 3D. Even that sometimes the payoff of the 3D stuff is maybe not worth it, but I knew I wanted the camera to kind of zoom through. And you can do that in After Effects, but I wanted the objects to have the 3D perspective to them as the camera moved past them. So that is easier in Blender. So I modeled the room in Blender. I wanted to keep it pretty simple, minimal. The focus is on the two characters, and then finally on the logo in the back. Jamie wanted some PETA mugs on the desk, so I happily did that, and animated the logo in the back, and then used the magnifying glass as like a nice transition out of the intro. Always like doing nice little transitions. Should probably try and avoid just doing fades or wipes whenever you can. And they were happy with it, and when they showed it to PETA, they were also really happy with it. I also rendered out some different aspect ratios for different social media platforms, and I always like to provide, because I've created this whole scene in Blender, and it's quite quick and easy to just render out a couple of extra frames, I always like to provide some extra assets that could be used for other social media stuff by other designers in the future. The client doesn't always ask for this kind of stuff, but it's just an extra value add, I guess, that I like to provide. And overall, this project was really fun. It was a little challenging, especially because I did it over the Christmas period, because they wanted to launch this thing in January. And I knew that I was going away for January to the winter reunion at camp. So it was pretty tight. I normally don't like doing any work over Christmas, but this one in particular I was passionate about and really wanted to help. And so overall, it was definitely worth it. And you can see it if you go over to the Just So You Know podcast on YouTube. You can see my intro that I made at the start. go check it out. I'd love it if you like the intro, go over to one of the episodes and leave a little comment saying something about the intro. That would be really handy for me, because I'm hoping to do more stuff like this in the future. I'm hoping to get more clients in the vegan space, because as you probably know, it's a topic that I'm passionate about, and doing this kind of work is really fun. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this little insight into how these projects go, and I'll see you in the next one.